One of the most important things that farmers deal with every fall is residue breakdown. And it's not a big deal in a lot of cases, like when we've got soybean crop here, there's not that much residue. But when you've got, let's say, continuous corn or even continuous wheat, there is a tremendous amount of residue out there, and it's how you're going to deal with that. How quickly can we get that to break down?
Well, it's interesting that you note the differences between crops. For example, with soybeans, there's quite a bit of nitrogen in this crop residue because we're talking about a legume crop here that actually produces its own nitrogen. When you're talking about corn or wheat, those are crops that are very high in carbon and very low in nitrogen. And in order for that residue to break down, it's going to be broken down by the microbes in the soil. And they need to have a good amount of nitrogen out there to blend with that carbon to be able to break down residue.
But it's not just that, obviously. I mean, when you look at a corn plant, that corn plant is huge. There's a lot of overall mass to it. With a soybean plant, I mean, how much do we really have left when it's all said and done? By the time it goes through the combine, you know, there's a little bit of stuff on the ground, but it's no big deal. But to Darren's point, with that residue, it seems like the soybean residue disappears very quickly, and that's the reason why, is because it does have a fair amount of nitrogen in it.
Well, when you think about corn stalks, for example, how many tons are going to be out there per acre? There's quite a few. If you were to bale them up, you'd get quite a few bales per acre. So when we're looking at that residue and thinking about the weight of that residue, also think about that carbon to nitrogen ratio that I started talking about. With corn stalks, it's typically about 60 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. And for the microbes in the soil to break it down, we need to get that ratio down to about 12 or 13 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. So you can see why it's so important when we're trying to break down corn residue to add a little bit of nitrogen to the equation. And many farmers will say right behind the combine, they like to come and put just a little bit of nitrogen out there, or if they start spreading manure out on those corn stalks, something like that that has quite a bit of nitrogen in it, they can begin that breakdown process a little bit earlier. On our farm, by the time we're getting our corn out of the field, a lot of times the snow is coming very shortly after, and we don't have a lot of time to get residue breakdown. So it all depends on how early that harvest is as to how much breakdown you can start to get occurring in the fall.
Yeah, but the other thing is, in a lot of our corn residue, we already have a fair amount of nitrogen. We try never to short that corn plant on nitrogen. So if your corn stalks have a fair amount of nitrogen in them, and also sulfur, because sulfur works in conjunction with nitrogen. Basically, sulfur helps nitrogen be more available, more useful in that plant. So if we have a good nitrogen to sulfur ratio as well, we get a little bit faster breakdown of stalks. The other thing is microbial activity, beneficial bacteria and fungi. If you have those living well in your soil, in other words, if your soil has a relatively neutral pH, if it's not waterlogged, if it has a fair amount of air in it, if it has balanced nutrients overall, if all those things are right and not too much compaction would be another thing I could throw in there, then we're going to have good microbial activity. You're also going to have much faster breakdown of any residue you have.
One other thing that we do on our farm that's a little different than other farms, and there are many farms that are doing this now too, I'm not saying we're the only ones, we're using a chopping corn head, and by doing that, we're sizing up that residue. We're getting the pieces down to maybe 4-inch chunks, maybe 6-inch chunks, but by slicing the ends of that, now you can start to see the microbial activity working in from the sides rather than having a big long piece with all that lignin on the outside of the stalk that kind of holds that fungus outside the plant, where it's taking a little bit longer to get into the core of that stalk.
Well, that's the whole thing, is opening that up. So you want to expose the center of that. Another thing that you can do to get that residue going, which a lot of people will do, is tillage. Now, we're not real big proponents of full-scale tillage just because over time you can reduce your organic matter levels in soil. But doing a little bit of light tillage, so maybe running over with a Salford machine or a super coulter or a twister, something like that, to get a little bit of soil mixed with that residue, that will be a good thing and speed that breakdown as well.
All right, now you said something a little bit ago about tillage speeding up that breakdown of residue, but also potentially reducing organic matter levels in soil over time.
This is one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't realize this years ago either. I just thought, oh boy, if you have corn or wheat where you have all kinds of residue, you throw that into the ground, over time you're going to build your organic matter. No, you're not. You're going to deplete your organic matter levels. That's been proven over time. If you look at the last 100 years in the United States, our organic matter levels have continued to fall, and it's because of tillage. So we want to reduce tillage as much as we can, and I'm not saying you have to go complete no-till or anything to do this, but you want to reduce your tillage, eliminate the plow, that kind of thing, and you will over time, hopefully, increase your organic matter levels. And you know, I've never really fully understood why this is either. I talked to soil scientists about it, and here's the explanation in very simple terms they've given me. They say, look, when you do full-scale tillage like a moldboard plow, it's like throwing fuel on the fire. You get so much oxygen there, and it just burns up that organic matter in the soil way quicker than what we want. So over time, we'd like to see organic matter levels increasing in soil. When organic matter levels are higher, you get so many good things in your soil like compaction reduction. You can hold more water, you can hold more nutrients. You just have a much more rich soil. So we want to increase the organic matter levels, not decrease them.
All right, now we talk about you may want to reduce tillage. This is something for your farm that you've got to think about, and that's really what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to tell you how to farm on your farm. You know how to farm on your farm. But we're just saying, think about some of these different concepts that, hey, if I want to build up my organic matter, maybe I should consider making some changes to what I'm doing.
But the reason why most guys do tillage is because they want that residue gone. So that's the reason why we're talking about all this today. So it's making sure you have ample nitrogen and sulfur out there, have a neutral pH, have balanced nutrients. You want to have good microbial activity, and maybe do just a little bit of light tillage. Use it chopping corn head. All these things will speed that residue breakdown up without having to destroy your organic matter level.
All right, and if you want to check in your fields where your organic matter levels are at versus where they were historically, go right into the fence line. Pull a soil sample in the fence line where you've got some grass that's been growing and that area has been undisturbed probably forever, depending on where you're farming. So pull a sample out of the fence line, then pull a sample out in the middle of the field and just see where you're at. Many times we'll see guys with organic matter levels of 5 or 6% in the fence line, but out in the field they may be down to 1, 2, or 3%. So we know that we've burned up some of that organic matter over the years with the practices we're using. Now, it's certainly possible to get those levels back up. We've got some of our ground that we've built back up into the 5s in organic matter now, where it's almost as good as it was in the fence line, and we're still working on that. That's our goal. We want to get back to where this ground was productivity-wise when we first started farming it way back 100 years or more ago.
Well, once again, it's very important how you deal with the residue in terms of what kind of crop you're going to raise in the future. It's also very important that you control weeds like our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?